throw down. Heartbeats racing, can't slow down. Feel the tension, feel the heat. Emotions hitting on repeat. Wrestling win with R.I.P.
Hey everybody, welcome in. A little bit of a change up. Obviously, I sent out the review of Superman last night. Hope you had a chance to take a look at that. Hope you enjoyed it. And today, a Superman of sorts, unfortunately, has passed away. That's right, Hulk Hogan. Unfortunately, has passed away. So, what I wanted to do was I wanted to create just a quick podcast. This might not even be long, but we'll see how it goes. But I want it to be extremely positive. We'll talk about a couple things. His influence on my fandom, number one, the business in general. So I'm not going to talk about a lot of the goofy stuff, especially like the most recent like political stuff and the racism stuff and the sex tape stuff and just all the negativity surrounding him. And it probably really the mid to late 2000s, obviously. So with that said, and I don't think I've ever really kind of talked about this on the show. You know, I got into wrestling right around the time of, I believe it was SummerSlam '89. Let me double check that really quick. SummerSlam. And funny enough, I had a podcast ready to go, like basically kind of detailed my fandom. So yeah, SummerSlam 1989. And if you're not familiar, this is the year that Hulk Hogan teamed up with Brutus the Barber Beefcake against Zeus and Macho King with Sherry in his corner. And for me, I was introduced to wrestling around this time through family. We had happened. I had family in South Carolina that we visited for the summer, or at least for a weekend. And it just happened to be the same weekend that SummerSlam fell on, and my uncle and my cousin, but really my uncle was in love with this. They bought every single pay per view. They had everything. Sorry, I had to take a drink instead of choking and coughing. But they would get every pay per view, and at this time it's 1989. So I mean, there's not a ton. There's a lot to catch up on. I mean, there's a number of WrestleManias by this point. There's only like maybe two SummerSlams. You got only a couple of Survivor Series, only a couple of Royal Rumbles, and they had tapes. They had videotaped everything. So when I left that weekend, like I was enamored by it. My cousin had everything. I can't remember if I think I mentioned this, but like I said, I can't remember if I put it out. But this guy, he had literally everything. And at this particular point, it was the LJN toys. He had the LJN ring. He loved wrestling. He had mats. We would practice moves and he would always be doing it to his sisters and stuff like that. And then of course, anytime you had a swimming pool, you would have to practice the moves. But long story short, like my uncle got me into this, and it really started with like tape trading, basically, where he saw that I was like in love with it. Around the same time, the movie No Holds Barred came out, where it features Zeus the character, and obviously Hogan's in that as well, but as a different character. So I was like seeing all this and experiencing all this at the same time. And my mom, rest in peace as well, she got me into this because she was very well. Not I want to say she's very interested, but she was as a kid too. They would go to Madison Square Garden, so she like saw Bruno San Martino as a kid, and she was very familiar with wrestling. She was also familiar with the side that's like the work, but she never really mentioned anything until like I was until I figured it out for myself. And at that particular time, I think I'm a little bit into comics, superheroes, and then I see Hulk Hogan for the first time, and this was like the first time like a real life superhero, right? I mean, all the guys at this time were incredibly jacked and wild, and I think it's in the same SummerSlam you see Rick Rude versus Ultimate Warrior, and it's just a number of different characters, and it was just so awesome that I fell in love with it right away. Watched all those tapes, and of course, Hulk Hogan's the headliner. He's carrying the Federation, at this particular point as well. So I'm experienced and I'm going for the ride. So like Hulk Hogan originally was like my guy. I had the bandana. I forget where I got that from. I think I got it from a friend. I still have it, or rebought it, the same one that I was missing. And then of course, you get into the toys, the action figures. Eventually, within a couple of years, the Hasbro start to come out, and he was just like the first like really super like larger than life character. You've got obviously when mid match or his comeback in the match is when he starts to Hulk up, where he's like invincible to power and pain, um, like a superhero. Of course, watching all the early WrestleManias, Rockin' Wrestling, WrestleMania 3, obviously with him versus Andre the Giant, his feud with Piper, um, just so much history there. It is sad to think about, honestly, but he was the initiation for me into professional wrestling and really my love for it over the last 30 plus years. Um, and I attribute, him getting me back into wrestling really, kind of really twice. Um, so just kind of a brief introduction. I'll try to stay closer to like the WWF years, but if you're not familiar with his career, he started wrestling. Man, he started wrestling in the mid to late 70s. He went all over the world at that particular time. He was actually in the WWF very briefly from 79 to 81. It's where he actually got his name, or his last name, from Vince McMahon Sr. At that particular point. He ends up leaving there and going to New Japan. Spent some time, obviously, in the AWA. And then now the territory days when Vince takes over, starts really buying up all these promotions and expanding nationwide. He handpicks Hogan to basically carry the flag for the company, and he would do so for the better half of a couple of decades, um, before eventually the mid 90s ish is kind of when things start to kind of, or early 90s I should say. His final run, or at least his final championship run in the early days of WWF, was really 1993. At that particular point, I think Vince was in a situation, and you can see this all in the documentaries as well around Vince and the WWF, and even like the Monday Night Wars, because I think this kind of like put a fire in him as well. So they, at this particular point, or at least Vince thinks that Hogan's done basically, and it's so crazy to think because at this particular time, um, Hogan's probably mid 30s, maybe, and put out to pasture essentially by Vince. He obviously does some TV at that particular point. I remember being a kid and seeing all the movies, the Nanny, Suburban Commando, um, and then what was the other one? Thunder in Paradise. And eventually that leads to him going to WCW. It's shot on the same lot. Ric Flair and Eric Bischoff approach him, and he joins up in 1994. If you've seen the documentary on Netflix with Vince, I think it's in that one where he mentioned he would never compete against Vince in any form or fashion. He ends up joining WCW, and this is a point too, where they start to bring over some of the, in quotes, you can't see obviously because we're not on video, some of the older wrestlers. So Randy Savage joins because he still had a lot left in the tank, and Vince had kind of relegated him to this color commentating on matches, and this is like the early days of Monday Night Raw and stuff like that. So it was cool to see Savage and Hogan because they were still very much in their prime. Um, Brutus the Barber Beefcake and eventually goes over there, and a number of other individuals, and they start to kind of really build that promotion out. At that particular time, I just remember seeing it because I think, well, obviously TBS and TNT is carried nationwide, but I would always be able to watch, a lot of the Saturday morning shows and things like that were taped in Universal Studios before they start to really make it big and hit off on Monday Nitro. But he carried two promotions on his back. I mean, the world was enamored by Hulk Hogan. You can look at some of the YouTube videos as well. There's a number of collectors that are out there that just have, there's everything. If you think of like bands, like the biggest one that comes to mind from a merchandising standpoint is always Kiss, right? They have like anything that they could slap their label on, they have as a product. And Hogan was that guy, whether it was vitamins, what was that friggin' blender? He had like a little blender. He turned down, or at least he says he turned down the George Foreman grill. He was doing infomercials. He was doing all kinds of stuff, all different products, toothpaste, all kinds of oddball things. He was everywhere that you looked. He was like the first to me, honestly. Obviously, Andre the Giant was an attraction, a man based on his size. He had also broken over into acting as well, if you remember from The Princess Bride. So he had done some different things. But Hulk Hogan, to me, seemed like the first guy from a pop culture standpoint. Like, no matter if you didn't know wrestling, you still knew Hulk Hogan. And there's only been a couple of guys like that I can think of in wrestling. You think of Hogan, The Rock, John Cena, Ric Flair, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I think anybody in the world could pick any one of those guys out. Maybe there might be pockets where not everyone might know Ric Flair, but these guys fuck is the word? What a moron. Can't think of the word. But these guys were beyond wrestling. They were pop culture icons. So you knew of him, and he's carrying multiple promotions. Obviously, still had a large, heavy fan following. Kids loved Hulk Hogan. I had kind of soured on him pretty early. As I mentioned, I started watching the tapes, the hulking up. He seemed like invincible, never lost a match, which is funny because as you grow older, or at least you start getting into the age of the internet, where you start to hear like all the behind the scenes and all the dirt sheet stuff, and that doesn't work for me, brother. That kind of stuff. But still never really phased him from a fan standpoint. I think maybe at a certain point, people were maybe a little bit tired of the say your prayers, eat your vitamins kind of routine, especially coming out of some of the trials and different things along those lines. But you get to the point where you are at Bash at the Beach, July 7th. I think it was 1996. You got the Outsiders, which is comprised of Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. And again, this is like peak. This is when the internet starts to kind of peak when you're a kid. You have the message boards, you have people you can interact with. So I knew about like the Outsiders were coming, and all the buzz online was who was going to be the third guy that was supposed to show up at Bash at the Beach for the 6-man tag match. On the other side, you had Randy Savage, Lex Luger, and Sting. So nobody else ends up showing up for the Outsiders during the match. And the thought process, to me at least, for a lot of people who were watching was, okay, so one of the guys on the WCW side is likely going to turn heel against the WCW group, and they'll join the Outsiders, and then we'll be off to the races. And then, of course, the most infamous and famous heel turn in history. You could say what you want about the John Cena recent heel turn, but this is the one that shook, I think, the most people to their core, because you have Hulk Hogan coming down the entrance, drops the leg on Macho Man Randy Savage out of nowhere. No one expects it. And then we are off and running. Like at this particular point, the New World Order is formed. And the glory days are really like the Hogan, Nash, Scott Hall. That's it. It starts to get goofy at a certain point when they start continuously adding members. And then, of course, when Eric Bischoff becomes like, again, the mouthpiece. No one, I mean, what a move. What a clown. But it was really Hogan, Hall, and Nash. And it was a stunning move. It shook the wrestling world. I think it shook the pop culture world as well, like Hogan finally turning heel. So for me, again, a monumental moment in wrestling that, from a competition standpoint, made wrestling awesome again. You had Monday Night Raw on the other side, eventually going live. And then just like the competition. So every show was getting better and better. Eventually down the line, obviously we all know the story. the final years of WCW. It's not all sunshine and rainbows as Hogan eventually leaves WCW again. And then, the rest of his career is kind of like between WWF, WWE, TNA, a little bit of New Japan sprinkled in here and there for different shows and things along those lines. And most recently, he's kind of come back as, I think, at the start of the Netflix era, everybody knows about, kind of getting booed out of the building, promoting his beer and stuff like that. But the impact that he had on a lot of people, I think you'll start to see it more online now that he's passed. Because a lot of obviously the negativity should hopefully fade a little bit away, and people will obviously hopefully reflect, recognize, and understand just how important he was to the world of professional wrestling, how much influence he had on a number of people. You go on Twitter today and you can see just how many people are showing their support and kind of recognizing just what he meant to the business. So again, he helped start, my association and familiarity with wrestling, changed the path that I was on in terms of like what I was interested in, and got me excited to, tune in every week, and really changed, the business in general, and made an impact anywhere and everywhere he went. So, really, that's it. Rest in peace, Hulk Hogan. And you guys enjoy the rest of your week, and maybe we'll talk over the weekend. But again, rest in peace, Terry Bollea. Passes away on July 24th, 2025. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Out in the ring where we throw down, heartbeats racing, can't slow down. Feel the tension, feel the heat, emotions hitting on repeat. Wrestling win with our inner fight. In the spotlight every night. Voices shout and bodies clash. In this world emotions crash. Tangled up in thoughts we spin, in the chaos we begin. Finding strength that's deep inside, facing fears we cannot hide. Wrestling win with our inner fight. In the spotlight every night. Voices shout and bodies clash. In this world emotions crash. Every grapple, every hold tells a story to be told. Raw and real and full of fire, pushing through the darkest mire. Wrestling with our inner fight. In the spotlight every night. Voices shout and bodies clash. In this world emotions crash.